Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm just awesome. Grateful to be alive. Couldn't be happier. Well, that's not true, but I'm doing all right. No complaints.
Man, I'm glad to hear it. We are in the middle of a pretty exciting time to be a wrestling fan. Of course, we've got WWE SummerSlam in the rearview mirror. And now we're circling All In, just a couple of days away. It's this Sunday, as folks are listening to this. We're, 48 hours away. I can't believe that's real. I think it's an 11 o'clock start time here in Alabama. So don't forget, it's not a Sunday night pay-per-view because of the time difference between here and London. You're going to have something fun to do around lunchtime on Sunday. It's a really, really big show, Eric. And I know that there's been a lot of goalposts moving in the history of AEW, but my goodness, man, anytime you got 50,000 tickets out, it's a great sign for the wrestling business. What say you?
No, I agree. It's particularly in the UK. I mean, I think we've talked about it. UK is an outlier, in my opinion. It's a benefit to independent wrestling, WWE, AEW. There's just a massive appetite the product in the UK, and it's great to see everybody taking advantage of that, particularly the independent scene.
It's a lot of fun to think about, how far AEW has come. Of course, they just had their big monster announcement that All In next year is going to be a stadium show here in America. All In Texas is happening in Arlington, Texas at Globe Life Field. We sort of hinted around this last week. We knew an announcement was coming. Now we know all the details. Saturday, July the 12th in Arlington, where the Texas Rangers play baseball, Globe Life Field. This is if you're a fan of the big show and the extravaganza and the pomp and circumstance, it's not going to get much bigger than this next year for AEW, I don't think. Are you surprised that they're leaving Wembley and that they're going to Texas?
Yeah, I think it's insane. I think it's, in my opinion, and again, no inside information, just looking at all the various dots that come our way vis-a-vis AEW and their surrogates. I think this is as much about hype in the face of renegotiation for television rights, or in some cases, new negotiations, because after all, the exclusive window is gone. We're not hearing anything about AEW shopping their show. By the way, I have enough people on the ground in LA that I still have relationships with. And if that were the case, I'm not guaranteed I'd hear about it, but I'd have a pretty good chances I'd hear about it pretty quickly. And I've not heard about it yet. Again, something could be going on that I'm not familiar with. That's certainly could be the case, but kind of interesting that all of these big Australia and stadium shows, all of this great news leading into, like I said, television renegotiations or hopefully a new home for AEW, in contrast to actually what's going on. Attendance is in a toilet. It has been trending in that direction for quite some time. Ratings are in the toilet and have been trending that way for the last 2.5, 3 years. So there's no new good news in terms of reality. There's lots of good news in terms of perception. So we'll just see if perception does in fact become reality, or if it's just a lot of DixieCon hype.
Oh my God, Eric, help me understand. Is it my perception that there's 50,000 tickets out for this Sunday, or is that not?
We're not talking about that. We're talking about you just comfortably switch gears in the conversation. You asked me about the stadium show in Texas. That's what I was reacting. We've talked about Wembley. It's an outlier. Congratulations.
But why won't Texas be an outlier next year?
There's nothing in the United States that would indicate there's an ice cube's chance in hell that AEW could fill a stadium or even half of a stadium. They're drawing 2,500 people to their live A show. Where's the Where's the connective tissue with reality that would make somebody think that here in the United States, not in the UK, it's an outlier. It's not reflective of anything that AEW is doing right or wrong, other than flying over there and taking advantage of the market. Here in the States, where Texas Stadium is, they can't draw flies if they roll their talent in horse shit. So where's the logic? And the only logic that I can find, and especially given the pattern of Tony Khan, who loves to hype, who loves to build up big announcements, big surprise, change the face of professional wrestling as we know it. And it's just air. So he has a pattern of overhyping and underdelivering. And my opinion, based on the context of this conversation, was that perhaps these announcements are more to persuade or get interest from new suitors for their television program or give confidence to Warner Brothers Discovery. It's just a possibility because there's no reality. There are no facts on the ground that would suggest to even the most optimistic diehard Kool-Aid drinking AEW fan that they're going to be able to fill an arena. I just don't see it. I mean, I get the excitement and, we want it to happen so bad, we're going to will it by just saying it over and over and over again. We're going to change our destiny by just repeating what we want to have happen without doing anything to affect it and to make it happen. Sorry.
Eric, I know you think that this is all theater for a television deal, which I would say, well done. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do is put on your best, put your best.
And I don't mean to interrupt you because it's rude and you know how I get when people do that to me, but I want to be clear you understand. I'm not sure that that's the case. It's the only thing I'm left with in the face of no logical information or suggestion as to why you would do that. The only logical thing is maybe it's just showcasing. Or
you think there's a chance WWE's running SummerSlam there next year in Wembley? Because they've announced that SummerSlam 2026 is going to be in Minnesota. But I don't think they've announced yet where SummerSlam is going to be for 2025. I'm wondering, do you think that maybe is the strategy, that AEW could move up and they would happen before SummerSlam, move out of the arena, bring it back more stateside? I think there's a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes, but I, for one, am excited about it because, and I know you're saying, they can't draw and blah, blah, blah. But they just did 50,000 seats this weekend. And we're on at the same time saying, their ratings are in the toilet here. Like 6 or 7 times more people watch the program here than they do over there. I think that you're going to have a lot of fly-in travel from all over the world. I know more than 24 fans personally who are going to this show in the UK this weekend. I'm going to be watching here, but I know a lot of folks who are going. And I think that they'll have that sort of same fly-in from all over the world for Texas. I'm not going to say they're going to sell 50,000 tickets, but I think they'll sell 30,000 tickets next year in Arlington.
Yeah, I don't want to make a prediction because I'm not in the business any longer, but I think it's going to be a disaster. My prediction, just based on what's currently happening, unless something changes. And it's funny, I just posted a long post on Twix X just a few moments before the show started. It kind of ties into this. Something has to change because, so much focus, especially amongst the AEW fan base. I'll let it go at that. The ones that are most aggressive on social media, not all of them, for sure. But what I'm hearing and reading, it's like, AEW has so many great storylines. Dave Meltzer himself, wrote a while back, the problem with AEW is they have too many storylines. You just can't really focus on one. And it's like, what? Apparently, AEW, Tony Khan and AEW, and the talent and a lot of the staff and clearly some of the most vocal social media think that what they see in AEW is a story. It's boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. That's a story too. It's just not compelling. It's not interesting. You can make that story interesting, like, I don't know, Shakespeare did, and have a classic, but that story in and of itself isn't, boy meets girl, is not really a story. It's a premise. It's a foundation for one. And you have to build on it. And you have to make it dramatic, and you have to create conflict. You have to create hope, and you have to create jeopardy. And you have to create all these things that are in every single story, successful one, compelling one, people, that have ever been told. WWE is doing it. AEW is not. They're paying lip service to it.
Well, something AEW is doing is putting on one heck of a show at Wembley Stadium this Sunday night, and Eric Bischoff has agreed to sit down with me immediately after the pay-per-view. So when the confetti starts to fall one way or another, we want you to hurry to 83weeks.com, because we're going to be giving you a live reaction from Eric Bischoff and myself. Eric's agreed to watch this marathon show. I'm going to be watching it with a house full of folks, and not going to imbibe. I'm going to keep it between the ditches, and we're going to be your host to talk about what happened at the biggest AEW show of the year, All in London. Might be the last All in London for a little bit, since they're coming stateside next year, but we're going to break it down, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We want you to join us. It's a live post reaction this Sunday, immediately after the All In show. Again, it's an early start time. The show's going to start at like 11 Central. I think they have scheduled the post-game press conference on YouTube for 4 p.m. Central. So I guess that's 5 Eastern. So somewhere around there is when you should expect to be at 83weeks.com, locked and loaded with myself and Eric Bischoff. Go hit that subscribe button right now and do yourself a favor. Turn on the notifications bell. When you hit that notifications bell, you'll get a push notification on your phone letting you know that Eric and I are live. So you don't have to set your calendar. You don't have to try to remember it or punch something in your alarm. Just go ahead and hit the notifications bell at 83weeks.com. So it's a 1-2 punch. Subscribe button and then the notifications bell, and you're going to be there with us. Eric, I can't believe this is real, but before we clicked record today, you told me that you recently listened to AEW Unrestricted, which is the AEW podcast hosted by friends of the show, Will Washington and Aubrey Edwards. And they had a special guest in Jen Pepperman, who in a prior life worked on the writing staff with WWE. I think she was a part of Bruce Pritchard's team there in creative. And then all of a sudden we found out she was leaving the company. And before you know it, here she is in AEW. As I understand it, you listened to that AEW podcast. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you thought about Jen Pepperman's conversation.
Yeah, well, first off, I had never listened to the AEW podcast. It was suggested to me by a good friend, Trust, suggested I take a listen to it. And I did. I was very, very impressed. I don't know what the rest of their shows sound like, but this was a really well-produced, very interesting, and I give Aubrey credit for that. She asked really great questions. Oftentimes, it's not so much the guest. Now, the guest brings a potential for a good interview based on they may be and what their backgrounds are. But if you don't ask the right questions, don't dig a little bit. If you don't ask the questions that are not quite as obvious as anybody else would ask, those are really good questions. And I think Aubrey did a fine job. She has a great voice for podcasting. I found her voice to be interesting. I could feel her energy when there was energy in her voice. I could feel different vibes from her. She knows how to use her voice. And Will Washington, I thought, did a great job. Neither of those two stepped on each other. They really complemented each other more than they distracted from one another. And that's not very common either. There's a lot of people that we all listen to. Some of them are our close friends. And you get more than one of them on a show, and it's like, because everybody's stepping all over everybody else. This was really, really well done. And I love Jen Pepperman more now than I thought I did. She's just an amazing woman. And kind of tying into what I was talking about early on about Tony Khan needing to make a change. Everybody's so focused on whether or not they get a renewal and how much the renewal is going to be, like it fucking matters to any of them. It doesn't, other than AEW will still be around. But nobody's talking about the quality of the product. And it's, again, I don't want to beat up. Okay? I'm just trying to make a point without sounding like I'm taking swings at people. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist. And Tony's a data analyst, I guess, as part of his profession and his expertise. Why would you not look at your own data and go, okay, well, this is really not going the way it should go. It's time to make a change. Any other business would. You know, I don't know shit about football, but I would imagine if I was the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars and I had a quarterback that I was paying an incredible amount of money to and just couldn't complete a pass no matter how hard we tried. We love the quarterback. He's a wonderful person. Everything's great. He's such a team player. Everybody in the market loves him until Sunday. Because he can't win a game. What'd you do? You'd look at the data. You would look at the reasons why that quarterback isn't working, and you would make adjustments. Think, why doesn't Tony do the same with his wrestling brand, his wrestling product? It's not working. The creative approach just isn't working. If it was working, you wouldn't see the level of deterioration that we're seeing in the audience and the fan base in general, including ticket sales. If it was working, it's clearly not working and hasn't been for over 2 years. One of the biggest angles of the year, their version of the NWO angle, where Tony Khan gets attacked and ends up in a brace and then wears it on ESPN on an NFL draft broadcast. Such a big deal out about it. It lost ground. It was a miserable failure because they didn't know how to tell a compelling story. They told a boy meets girl story. That has to change. And what I said in my post earlier today, boy, this is turning into a freaking monologue. What I said in my post earlier today is that it's just a matter of time before Tony is going to have to make a change. And I hope, because he has the resources, not only does he have an unlimited financial resource, I say unlimited, who knows, maybe there's a limit to it.
It's unlimited.
Okay. He's got unlimited financial resources. That's a big part of it. But he's got the human resources right there under his nose. Jen Pepperman, especially now, I've put her over. I didn't really work with her. I didn't work with her for a couple months in general. We didn't work specifically on any one program or any one piece of talent. We worked together with various talents and various stories, but very superficially, nothing in-depth. But I did have a lot of very in-depth conversations with her about storytelling and structure and how she approaches it, given her episodic television background. And I wanted to get a feel for someone who had so much credibility outside of wrestling. When I first met her, I couldn't wait to see how she had adapted her experience to this very unique product, which is professional wrestling. And in listening to Jen yesterday during the interview, she has a stronger grasp than I even thought she did after having spent, one-on-one conversations with her. She's really, really good. And if I'm Tony Khan, seriously, and I'm not trying to stir shit, I'm not trying to do anything other than share an honest opinion. If I'm Tony Khan and I'm looking at the situation I'm currently in, I'm hoping and praying that my television partner doesn't sell the company off parts, which could happen. By the way, that's a real thing. That company is in such duress financially, and from a management perspective. And David Zasloff is probably sitting on a ticking time bomb, to put it mildly, as the head of that network who woke up and found himself $9.1 billion in the red unexpectedly. Not a good sign. But Tony's sitting there waiting and hoping, and maybe has good reason to hope, or some reason to hope, that if WBD figures out their NBA rights and doesn't sell their company off for parts, or worse, maybe there's a chance that Tony will get his renewal, and maybe it will be for an increase. I don't really care. What matters, though, is so what? Because if he gets that renewal and it's the same product that continues to lose audience, it's just a matter of time. He's got Jen. If I was Tony, I would sit down with Jen Pepperman today before the sun goes down and say, Jen, I want you to build the new AEW creative system. Not work on storylines, not come up with hot angles. Build me a system. Oversee the development of that system. Jen, you get to hire, we'll start off with 2 people that you feel you could really have fun, collaborate with, and come up with great stuff. And if I were Tony, I would give Jen complete creative control over the entire process. Tony needs to stay out. Tony needs to focus on the things that Tony's good at. Tony needs to focus on building out the business side of the wrestling business. Clearly, his family's got some success in that area. Focus on the things you do well, Tony. Run in the other direction from things that you are not good at, that you don't have experience in, that you don't have an instinct for. It's okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you any less than Vince McMahon or Paul Heyman or anybody else you want to compare yourself to. By recognizing your strengths and leveraging those strengths in a way to be an asset for your goals and your business. More importantly, recognizing, I don't want to call it a weakness. Just because you're not good at creative you can be good at 1,000 other things that matter way more. It's not a weakness. It just is what it is. Acknowledge that, acknowledge your strength, put the right people in charge. Jen Pepperman is so loyal. If you ever worried, Tony, about giving the keys to someone who might not have your best interest or someone who doesn't want to make you look good, because Jen and people like her, once you bring them in, once you develop that relationship, their job will be to make you look better, to make your decision for hiring them. That will make you look better. It will make the talent look better because now they're involved in stories that are compelling. And dare I say, at the end of all that feeling better and looking better, you'll probably be growing in your audience. And it's right there, Tony, in the palm of your hands. The evidence of your ability, your talent, your knack for creative, the evidence is there. You don't have that. But you've got so many other things. Why focus on the thing that you're not good at? Because your ego, more than likely, I've got one. Sometimes it's really freaking healthy. Sometimes it's not. It's human nature. We're all the same. It's perfect. But don't let your ego get in the way, Tony. You've got the assets right now. I would give Jen Pepperman is your solution right now. She is your solution. And you think, I'm going to take it a step further. If there's any concern on the part of WBD in AEW's ability to grow an audience, what better way to make a big move and to give creative 100% control of that. Yeah, you have to hold her accountable. You have to hold her team accountable. There has to be a plan in place. There has to be a way to measure success beyond your emotional reaction to what you see and whether you like it or don't like it from your perspective as a wrestling fan. That's not how you operate a business or produce a television show, by the way. So hold her accountable, but give it to her. She's right there. I'm babbling about this, and I refuse to stop talking about it because I'm hoping that somehow, some way, Tony will hear about this interview or about this show and these comments, and will at least consider that it might be a great idea.
But it's not any fun, so probably not going to happen.
Huh?
Well, I mean, I think Tony Khan got into the wrestling business to be the booker, to have fun. I mean, I think he wanted to be a part of WWE Creative once upon a time, to be involved in creative. And if he couldn't get his foot in the door in WWE Creative, why not just create your own? And to remove yourself from that creative process, I think it's not, I guess what I'm saying is, it's not like Tony Khan is doing any of this for the money. Like he doesn't. If Tony Khan decided, hey, I don't want to work ever again, he doesn't have to. His kids don't ever have to ever again.
I get that.
So this is like what he wants to do. So you're asking him, hey, Tony, this would be a lot better if you just stop doing the thing that you want to do. Like, that's just not realistic, I don't think.
So you don't think, I mean, I don't know, Tony, and maybe you don't know him well enough either to be able to have any insight into this question, but do you not think that as much as Tony wants to be a booker and be perceived to be Paul Heyman or Vince McMahon or even Eric Bischoff in the 90s, do you think he would rather be subjected to the kind of negative shit that he's subjects himself to, not just from me and Cornette, but from his own audience? Do you not think that he would find as much joy in having a successful wrestling company as opposed to an unsuccessful one that he gets to play booker in?
I think it all comes down to how you define success. You and I define it with a P&L. He doesn't define success that way. So I think he's having fun. And I think, I've got some friends who like to gamble. I, for one, am not a huge gambler. I mean, I like to get a little action on the games every now and again, just for funsies. But I've got friends who they go play slot machines. They go play poker tournaments. They go play blackjack. And they do it as like a hobby. And so, whether they're spending $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month on their hobby, it's no different than another friend of mine who, he's on the water every chance he gets doing bass fishing. And so I've got friends who have sort of expensive hobbies. And I think on some level, what we all forget when podcasts like this are being created and we're taking a look at the tangibles of business and maybe the intangibles, hey, he's happy. You may not be happy, and other people in the organization may not be happy. But I think Tony Khan, as we're talking right now in August of 2024, he's over the moon. He's thrilled. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. This was all an idea. And however we got here, there's 50,000 people who are coming to see his idea this weekend. I don't think he would define it as anything other than a huge success because he had an idea. He's realized that idea. He's having fun.
Well, all right then. And I guess part of that fun is trying to convince everybody he actually is competitive and he's a challenger brand and all the other business aspects that he brags about so often. Clearly doesn't care if people can see through that like a glass of water, but whatever. As long as he's having fun. The only thing that, I guess it doesn't matter because people generally, however many people listen to this podcast and they'll take clips of it and get a little press in the wrestling trades, but nobody's going to remember this podcast 6 weeks from now, 6 days from now, right? So these comments are going to come and go. But if the perception becomes that Tony Khan really doesn't care, as long as he's having fun, he doesn't care if the product sucks, because it does for the most part. There's some moments, but if you look at this show and you take your blinders off and just look at it objectively, it's just got so far to go. But hey, if he's having fun, I guess that doesn't matter, except for the people that do matter. That's the audience. when they're watching television, they realize that Tony Khan doesn't really care if the product sucks as long as he's having fun. That's not a good way to hold on to an audience.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. I don't know that we could be further apart on any of this, but something I know that you and I always agree on is how great a shave you get when you pick up a Henson razor. You know, if you were born after 1970, there's a very good chance your first razor was a multi-braid razor. I mean, these razors have been the status quo for over a half century. But what has that gotten us to? According to a recent study, 2/3 of men expect some irritation when they shave. And there's virtually no information on how to prevent irritation, only on how to go about treating it. It turns out over 2 billion plastic razors enter the landfill each year in the United States alone. 2 billion. The razor blade model leads to high operating costs, and more people are opting to either stop shaving or explore other more invasive hair removal methods. There's actually a place in town here who does that. But that's why Henson Shaving wants to change the shaving industry. Not through gimmicky subscriptions or some goofy moisturizing strip, but through groundbreaking research on the impact that shaving has on your skin. And here's a dirty secret about the razor industry. Even the cheapest dollar store disposable razor will give you a reasonably smooth shave. The trick is in removing the hair without negative outcomes to your skin, like irritation or razor burn or ingrown hairs or razor bumps. Henson wants to change the paradigm away from getting a smooth shave to getting a skin-friendly shave. And when Henson looked at all the other razors, they noticed a consistent lack of blade support. Basically, the blades have too much bend or flex. Think of anything that you'd cut with like a kitchen knife or a pair of scissors. You don't want the blade you use to be moving because you'd have less control. Well, Henson's razors are designed to hold the blade steady, so there's less bend and less wobble. Henson makes their razors with their aerospace machine shop in Canada that's also made parts for the Mars rover and the International Space Station, and the Henson machinists are exceptional at manufacturing. So the level of precision is one of the big reasons their razor is so much gentler on your skin. They've made it to where the blade only extends 0.0013 inches past the plane of the razor, and that's less than the thickness of a human hair. The Henson razor works with a standard dual-edge blade that costs less than 10 cents each. And once you own a Henson razor, it's only like $3 to $5 to replace the blades a year. You see, the razor itself is made out of aluminum, so there's no plastic. There's also no plastic in Henson's packaging either. And I have to admit, we've had other razor sponsors before, so I was a little skeptical. I mean, how good could it be? And once I actually used it, I understood. This is a quality product. You will feel the difference when you pull it out of the box and you hold it in your hand. And then I got to admit, you're going to feel like a little bit of a badass when you pick up a razor, an actual blade, the same way that, well, John Moxley and Ric Flair know a thing or two about, except they never had a razor this thin. This is the best shave I've ever had. I've got one in my travel bag. I keep one at the beach. I got one here. I won't leave home without it now. It is a game changer. And I like it so much that I've introduced my barber to it. And she's cutting heads coast to coast using Henson now. Let's say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensonshaving.com/Bischoff to pick the razor for you and use the code Bischoff, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just be sure to add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to hensonshaving.com/Bischoff and use our code Bischoff. So Eric,
Conrad,
yes, sir.
Before we get going, to the point about skin-friendly razors and Henson shaving, I just shaved before I came out to do the show. Jumped in a shower. Now, a little side note, my beard is really thick and rough around under my nose, my goatee area, right? It's super thick and super rough. But, the rest of my face, not so much, pretty light, right? When I shave, I don't use shaving cream. I shave in the shower. I never use shaving cream. Never have. And in the past, when I would shave in the shower before Henson, I would come out of the shower looking like I went through a windshield. Not all the time, but some of the times. And then just little cuts, little nicks and scrapes here under my neck, right under my nose. Always got it under my nose. So what do? You just break off those little pieces of tissue and you stick them all over your face, and hopefully the bleeding will stop by the time you get dressed and you're off to do whatever it is you're going to do. I got very used to that, right? Since Henson has entered my life, I have not nicked myself once, and I don't use shaving cream. Isn't that fascinating? Not one time. I got so used to nicking myself previously using typical cheap-ass dime store, razors, disposables. I just got used to it. And I just as you were saying that, you're reading, I'm going, damn, they're onto something, because I haven't nicked myself once.
Check it out, hensonshaving.com/Bischoff. Be sure to use that promo code Bischoff. 100 free blades. Come on, get with it. Hey, so we're going to be talking a little bit about negotiating television deals, doing an Ask Eric Anything. We got more than we can say grace over, as we like to say here in the South. And boy, I really don't want to do this, but it would be disingenuous if I didn't bring it up. I am a longtime subscriber of the Wrestling Observer. I consider Dave Meltzer a friend. I value his opinion. I take it for what it is. It's an opinion. But boy, there were a couple of missteps over the last week with Mr. Dave Meltzer. Unfortunately, he posted that Afa, the Wild Samoan, had passed away when he had in fact not yet passed away. And Bruce Pritchard took him to the absolute woodshed on social media about this. And you actually retweeted a post where people were pretty negative about Dave, and it continued. Mr. Meltzer posted a comment where he was talking about an internal memo that he saw from Warner Brothers Discovery on the total value of AEW programming. And then it was $288,265,720 per year based on ad revenue, blah, blah, blah. And it went down this rabbit hole. And then it comes out that, well, that wasn't actually an internal memo from Warner Brothers Discovery. It was posted by a fan to a Discord and then shared around. And I guess he took the bait. And the result is he was wrong twice in a week on some pretty big stuff. I hate it for Dave because, boy, he's got a lot of accurate stuff that he's reported. But boy, when these really glaring ones, tough week to be writing the Observer, easy week to be Eric Bischoff. The floor is yours, Mr. Bischoff.
No, it's not. Look, you are seeing it now. See, you've, and I respect the fact, actually, I admire the fact that you're willing to admit that you're a friend of Dave's and you don't let this kind of thing affect your perception of him, and you look for the better qualities. I think that makes you a good human being. And I like that. I like to be surrounded by people like you to make up for people like me. Part of the reason I'm different than you is because I've actually spent 30 years of my life in the wrestling industry. And that's not a knock, brother. That's not what it's, I know it sounds like one, but it's not. In that period of time, I saw the negative impact that Dave Meltzer and his lies, distortions, omissions, and fiction, I've seen firsthand how that negatively affects the industry. Just like Vince McMahon did. And it may be easy for people who have never really been in the industry, who don't understand or haven't seen firsthand some of the shit that's caused by Dave Meltzer and some people like him, but he's at the top of the list. So since you don't know that, you haven't had to experience it, you haven't had to deal with it, it's easy to discount that and just say, oh, that's just Dave being Dave, and sometimes he gets it right and sometimes he gets it wrong. But that's not true either. Dave has never done research. Dave has never applied anything remotely close to journalistic integrity to anything he writes. He doesn't fact check. He doesn't confirm anything. He doesn't double source anything. Excuse me. I want to make sure nobody misses a bit. Dave is a fraud. Dave hears things from a variety of sources. Some of it fits his narrative, the way he wants to choose, the way he chooses to look at the world, and the way he projects his thoughts about what's right and wrong about the industry. Dave will scour Reddit. He'll look at chat boards. He'll read a issue of Variety or surf online, looking for little tidbits of information that support his agenda. And then he'll put it out there as fact without sourcing any of it, without researching any of it, without confirming any of it. And he gets caught. It's always been that way. It has always been that way. He has been lying, distorting, misleading, and otherwise fraudulently convincing people that he's actually a good source for information about the wrestling business. He's conned so many people for so long. And all it takes is some idiot, I shouldn't say that. All it takes is some person who is writing in the mainstream media, who's writing about professional wrestling, but doesn't really want to do any of the research and take the time to figure anything out. So they just look for somebody who covers wrestling. And Dave Meltzer's name will pop up. Why? Because he was one of the first ones to do it. He was the first one to put out a dirt sheet, one of them. And to his credit, he's positioned himself as a credible third-party resource on the business of professional wrestling. And he's conned people into believing that. And it's not true because he doesn't do any research. I could go off on a tangent. That's my issue. You're seeing it now. We're all seeing it now because there's this thing called social media, and anybody and everybody can kind of point to all the bullshit that Dave Meltzer feeds everybody on a daily basis and call him out on it. If it wasn't for social media, if it wasn't for the internet, you'd all be thinking he's a great source of information. He's a fraud. He's charging people money because those people believe that he's a great source of firsthand knowledge and he's got direct relationships in the business. He has a couple of relationships in the business. Not many. And nothing credible. He gets so much shit wrong, but he tries every day to convince people he's got great relationships inside of WWE. He does not. He talks to fringe management, people who are kind of outside of the loop, technically management, but low level. People like him that live on the dirt, just like Jim Barnett did, Gary Jester did, Terry Taylor did. My buddy Zane Bresloff did. And I knew it. It was part of his charm. I could tell when he was regurgitating Dave Meltzer bullshit. And I just smiled and went about my business. But for those of us who have lived through Dave Meltzer's bullshit, every time this happens to him, and it's happening more and more consistently now, I get a smile on my face. Every time somebody calls him out and exposes him for the fraud that he really is, I just get a smile on my face. And I think, damn, it's about time. I'm sure Bruce does too. He feels the same way.
Well, let's move along. Of course, the topic today is talking about negotiating television deals and Ask Eric Anything. Tony Khan's been teasing a TV deal. We've been talking about it for a few weeks here. There's a big announcement coming. I guess the question I have is, do you think there's a chance we see that announcement this week, given that it's All In week and you're going to have more attention on AEW perhaps this week and next week than you will for the foreseeable future? Do you think this would be the week to make such an announcement?
I think it'd be great if it can happen for all the reasons you just said. There's going to be a lot of eyeballs. There's 50,000 people in a building. It's just going to add to the excitement. It's a bonus, right? It's a cherry on top. an important one. But yeah, if a deal is done and it can be announced, this would be an ideal time to do it.
I mean, respectfully, when they've been running, shows at the esports arena, and you could have that announcement come out and there's a visual of 1,300 fans there, or the announcement happens and there's a visual of 50,000 fans, it's kind of a no-brainer. I think that there's a real good chance that we'll see it. But I do want to ask about, the way wrestling and television used to be, because I know that this is something that you've spent a lot of time on. And I think you actually originally helped get your start trying to sell syndicated TV for the AWA. The model has clearly changed. I mean, television rights are now the new big thing, the new big line item above merch, above ticket sales. And that used to be what it was all about. We're going to use our television to sell tickets. Now it's a whole new line item. I mean,
it's completely inverted, isn't it? If you go back to the 60s and 70s, you shot your television, you produced your television, you flew talent in, you paid the talent to wrestle, you produced that show, and then you gave it. You didn't barter. There was no, you keep 6 minutes, I'll keep 6 minutes. You were able to retain some commercial inventory so you could promote your live events, but your television show was a lost leader. It was a cost of doing business. The real business is in the live ticket sales. Now it's completely inverted itself. It's
and cool. Somewhere along the way, kind of in the middle, and I think a lot of this happened when the Superstation became a thing. Wrestling promotions didn't just give the tape freely. They had to pay to air it. Yeah. So you would hear Bill Wantz, when he closed up shop, he had hundreds of thousands of dollars, allegedly, in unpaid television bills. And even Paul Heyman, at times would lose coverage in New York or Philadelphia because he was paying on a weekly basis. Now, a lot of that is back because, Vince McMahon said, hey, what do they really have if they have a territory? They have television in that area. Well, if I approach the television station and say, hey, I know they've been giving you the show, but I'll give you $2,000 a week to air this one instead.
Or a suitcase full of cash that no one needs to know about.
He drank your milkshake right up.
You know how many times I've heard stories, firsthand, secondhand stories from people who were involved in that?
Let's hear about it. Tell us some.
I'm not going to name names, but
what does it matter now?
No, it doesn't matter now.
Okay. Okay.
There are people, because I have friendships and relationships. They may not be in the business, but they're still alive. Where you'd walk into an office with a suitcase full of 5, 10, 15 grand and just forget to bring your briefcase with you. The program director or general manager would grab that briefcase, take it home, and you'd get your show on the air.
Ta-da.
There was a lot of that going on, a lot of it. It was more common than not in big markets. You're not going to get away with that in Des Moines, right? Or Cincinnati even, but New York, LA, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, Atlanta, maybe not Atlanta. Yeah, happened, especially when it was time to go national, especially when WWE was really beginning to assert itself and eat up the territories. There was a lot of that. It doesn't happen anymore. Now it's the television networks paying for the rights. It's just it's kind of cool. I'm really grateful to be alive and having had experienced the territory system as a fan. And then really as a very young man in my 20s, getting involved in the wrestling business and seeing it kind of transition from the territory system into the national cable, being a part of that whole process and just being a fly on the wall. Not that I had a lot to do with any of that, but just seeing it firsthand and seeing how the industry has evolved so much. It's a fascinating study of an entertainment property. It's really a fascinating study.
It's interesting to think about how much it's changed too, just in the more modern era. I mean, I know that I'm about to cite something that was almost 25 years ago, but I think most of us listening to this remember, I think it was 2000, when you saw the USA Network lose Monday Night Raw, and all of a sudden it was on TNN. I think what is lost on a lot of people is during the Monday Night War era, where ratings have never been higher and more people have, there's never been a time where that many people watched pro wrestling ever before, just setting records week in, week out. WWE was getting $100,000 a week from USA. It's like $5.2 million a year. And that was for the biggest audience possible. It's just hard to imagine how much, and in the scheme of things, how quickly it's all changed, Eric.
I think the Monday Night War era, the explosion into mainstream and pop culture that resulted with first Nitro going head to head with Monday Night Raw, and then the battle, obviously, with the launch of the NWO and WCW dominating for as long as we did, 83 straight weeks is what the rumor is, and 104 total. But that era, WWE going public based on the success, the rapid growth, the explosion, the turnaround of the business. If you look at WWE's business, 1993, 1994, 1995, it was not pretty. It was ugly. They were still suffering from the steroid trials and all the bad publicity that went along with it. Even though they would have some decent ratings, they obviously had a good TV deal, blah, 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 blah. But the business of the wrestling business was still suffering. Advertising was still suffering, which is, I'm guessing, I wasn't a part of the conversations, but I'm guessing why USA decided, we're done for now. And it went over to TNN. A lot of that, I'm guessing, had to do with the fact that ad sales did not support the cost of the show. Common kind of situation that we still hear about today. So, like I said, just fascinating.
It is fascinating. And it's weird to think how quickly it can get away from you. And if you've ever signed up for a streaming service, you know what I'm talking about. Did you know that like 75% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about? Before I started using Rocket Money, I thought I only had like a half dozen. I could not believe it when they showed me all that I was paying for. Between the streaming services, my wife's fitness apps, and all the delivery services, it felt never ending. But thanks to Rocket Money, I'm no longer wasting money on things I forgot about. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that will find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and even help you lower your bills so you can help grow that savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I can see all of my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with a few taps. I love how the dashboard shows me this month's spending compared to last month, so I can clearly see my spending habits. Plus, they'll even help me create a custom budget so I can keep track and keep my spending on track, more importantly. Rocket Money will even help you negotiate to lower your bills for you by up to 20%. All you got to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. That's right, they'll deal with customer service on your behalf. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/83weeks. That's rocketmoney.com/83weeks. rocketmoney.com/83weeks. Eric, we got tons of different questions about, the way the television business has evolved with regard to wrestling. And we haven't spent a ton of time talking about this, but when you first get going with Vern and you're trying to sell syndication, can you just explain what that means and what your job was and specifically what it entailed? What were you doing at the time?
It's really quite simple. It's a sales job. Instead of selling a vacuum cleaner or an encyclopedia set to a homeowner, I was taking a videotape and a little bit of a history of professional wrestling in any specific market. Let's say, for example, I'm going to Des Moines because Vern didn't have TV in Des Moines, hadn't had it for quite some time. So I would take a sizzle reel basically a VHS highlight reel of what the AWA is, a little bit about its history. And I would go back and learn some of the history of the AWA in that particular market. And sometimes you had to go back to the 70s in order to do that. And you'd make an appointment. If you do your research, you got your package together, you kind of understand the market, you know what other television stations, other channels in the market, you know what their program lineup is. You know, if I'm going to see a general manager of, say, Channel 4, an NBC station in Point, I'm going to make sure I understand what their schedule looks like. There's no way of me knowing what's working and not working at that point, especially because there was no ratings available to the consumer passive viewer. You had to be in the business and subscribe to Nielsen in order to get that data, and Vern didn't have that. So you just do your best, you do your research, and then you cold call the program director, start there. Sometimes your general manager and program directors are one and the same. Great, even better. Now that guy can actually make a decision. You're not pitching somebody that has to go pitch somebody else. I hate that when that happens. So, anybody that's in sales knows you want to pitch the decision maker. You're not somebody that's close to the decision maker. Anyway, you go in and you sit down, and just like in any sales job, you get to know your customer just a little bit, find out what you have in common outside of what you're there to talk about, if that's possible. Sometimes time restraints don't make it so, but oftentimes, especially in smaller markets, you got all day, man. Get to know the person, get them to talk a little bit about their memories of professional wrestling, try to get a feel for how they feel about it. So if you're up against a brick wall and all you're going to be able to take a brick out of the wall with is facts and numbers, or if you've got somebody that's got some kind of an emotional connection to professional wrestling because they remember watching it as a kid, or their kids love it, or their grandkids love it, whatever. Kind of find some of those common connections if you can. And then you go into the pitch and you tell, just like you would any other sales, you explain the features and the benefits of having professional wrestling. That wasn't hard to do, even in the AWA, because the local markets, AWA still did really well. It was the hometown team. It was an older demo, but we always still did pretty well, particularly in the Minneapolis market and Mason City, Des Moines, Denver for a good while. Some North, South Dakota, that was our territory. And we did well in those territories. So it wasn't hard to pitch cold, hard numbers to someone who has no emotional connection. But if you're fortunate enough to get in there, and usually you did, because this was back before, right now the television industry is nothing but a turnstile. Executives are going through there so fast. The average life expectancy of a Hollywood exec is probably under 6 months. It's just the turnover is so high because the business is becoming so much more difficult because profit margins are crashing, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. That's current. We're talking about 1987, Eric Bischoff knocking on the door of Channel 4 in Des Moines. You sit down, if you find that person that's got an emotional connection, now is when you really bring them in. Because Vern's model was, you keep 6, I'll keep 6 minutes of advertising, assuming there was 12 minutes of, I think there was at that time, 12 minutes in an hour. The station would keep 6, Vern would keep 6. And Vern would use his 6 minutes of advertising to promote whatever sponsor, to sell to whatever advertisers Vern had at that time. I'll go into that in a minute. The rest of it he would use to the best of his ability to promote whatever was happening in that market. So that when they toured that market, Vern could go in there and get a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 payday. And he'd do that once a month. Vern was a monthly territory, not a weekly territory, which is one of the reasons why it made it so appealing talent to work in AWA, because he paid pretty well, but the schedule was so much better because it was a monthly territory. So you weren't on the road every day. And that was it. I would go in, I'd pitch the show, I'd pitch the numbers, and then this is where it got meaningful or not, is I would pitch the station's participation in our monthly live events. Now we're going to buy commercial time for the live event. Not a lot is our show for that. But as a gesture of goodwill, we would buy some additional outside wrestling commercial inventory. We'd give a ton of signage at the event. We would promote the local channel, which is important to local television. You know, Mason City, Iowa, smaller markets, even Des Moines, Mankato, Minnesota, a lot of the country, your local television station is kind of a big deal. Your local weather people are celebrities. Local newscasters show up and open up car dealerships. It's an important part of the community. So we would create opportunities for the television station to be a part of that live event. And you pitch it. I had a great deal of success. When I got to AWA, I think we were on 26 markets. Within about a month and a half, we were up to 75 or 80. And it wasn't because I was exceptionally good. It's because I was the first person that they had hired that was dedicated to just do that and not as a part of my other responsibility.
I want to talk about when you first joined WCW and you're sort of getting the lay of the land. I know you're working your way up from C squad announcer, I think is the way you've described yourself. When does it click for you, or does it click for you at the time that, hey, we're here because we're cheap programming for Turner? Affordable programming.
You know, I didn't really think about it until probably about 92 or 3, especially under Watts, because that was a really high pressure situation. There was a lot of pressure on WC, not on me necessarily. It was in and out. C squad talent nobody gave a shit about. So my life was cool. But there was so much pressure on WCW because of the losses that had been incurred in the previous years, because of some of the stuff that Watts was doing, the controversy that it was creating. All of that was the catalyst for a lot of conversations about, my God, is Ted Turner going to pull the plug on this company? Because, you know, we've lost all this money, because we've never made a profit, because we lost $10 million last year, because this, because that, because of the bad headlines. So all of those things started becoming a part of the daily conversation inside of WCW, not only at the management level, but all the way down to talent. And the one thing that came out of that is we all kind of understood that, yeah, but what are they going to replace us with? Granted, Turner had a vast library. But fortunately for WCW still brought eyeballs to the network. And it was cheap. That's when I started learning more about the cost of programming. I mean, that was the beginning. I certainly learned a lot more when I got out of wrestling and started producing television on my own. But anyway, yeah, that's when I began to learn about cost effectiveness, the efficiency of professional wrestling in terms of cost compared to sitcoms or, you know, purchasing, licensing programming. Turner didn't have to license WCW. We didn't get $100,000 a week, $5 million a year. We got no percentage of the advertising. You know, it's funny, some people have reported on WCW $250 million. That's what the company got to report. That doesn't include the portion of the money that we generated that all the other divisions of Turner who happened to, you know, maybe walk by our office once a month took off the top. It didn't include the revenue that was generated by ad sales. We're spending over $350 million a year in 97 or 98. And gross profits were probably in excess of $50 to $60 million. By the time it got to us, after everybody else put their hand in the bucket, it was less than that. At one point, if you look at the cost of WCW Nitro programming, as expensive as it was, and as much talent as we had, it was still super profitable. Because the physical production of the show just, you know, there's no editing. One of the biggest costs in a show is post-production. physical production of a show, the on-site production of a show is, it's expensive, but the real money comes in post. You didn't have that compared to a sitcom, or have unions compared to a sitcom or a drama. We weren't paying, talent was paid a lot of money, you can all debate that, but not anywhere as close to talent in sitcoms and dramas. So it's always been a cost effective.
Let's talk a little bit about, when once upon a time, we've touched on this in the past, there's an NBA strike happening, and you negotiate with NBC about having WCW programming on the air. Can you tell us what your experience was like in those negotiations?
It wasn't really a negotiation. I just answered the phone. A friend of mine, Gary Constantine, who was an executive producer at NBC, the strike, he just called me from out of the blue. We had a pretty good relationship. We had developed a pretty good relationship by that, beyond just doing things together and wrestling every once in a while. Became personal friends. And he called me and said, "Hey, we got a hole. Want to fill it? We got this NBA thing, and we got a hole in our schedule, and we're looking for something good. What do you think?" I didn't even know what I was going to do at that point, the point of the phone call, but without thinking about it, I said, "Absolutely. Let me go get this approved," because it was off network. It was outside of the Turner family, so I couldn't just do it. Although now when I look back, I should have just done it. I did a lot of shit that I should have done that I just went ahead and did, and everybody was happy I did it. This probably would have been a good one. But anyway, I went right from my office. I hung up the phone with Gary Constantine. I had Gina Engel call Harvey Schiller and see if I could get up to see him right away. She did, he did, I did. Went into his office, and Harvey said, "Let me check." And he had to run it up the flagpole to his bosses, one of which was a guy, I believe it was Joe Uva. Joe Uva has since gone on to become one of the most powerful people in television, particularly advertising, but in television in general. Joe Uva, I think at the time, was head of ad sales. And he said, "Nope, didn't work. We're not going to have Turner broadcasting content on competitive networks. Nope." Shot it down. That was it. So it wasn't a good, we could have walked in there, probably would have pulled $1.5 million out, million at the time, because our cost of production of Nitro, if we just look at a single show, at that time, Neil Pruitt maybe will have a better handle on this, or David Crockett, but I'm pretty sure we were knocking $250,000, $300,000 an episode. Didn't include talent. That's just physical production. That's, what that would be in today's dollars. I don't know. Do the math. So it was pretty expensive to produce. But for NBC, I would have obviously marked up our production, because that's what you do. That's how television production companies actually work, is they take their cost of producing something and then they throw their margin on top of that. And that's the selling price, just like anything else. And we would have probably doubled, and I would have had to apply the talent cost, particularly in this case, because it wasn't an intercompany relationship. So the cost of that to NBC would have probably exceeded $1 million for one night. We knew that. Gary knew that. It wasn't coming cheap, but it was live action. Nitro was hot as hell. We were pop culture friendly, and we would have been prime time on NBC with a special. And we're going to have Dennis Rodman and, what was his girlfriend's name at the time, or wife?
Carmen Electra.
Carmen Electra. They were going to get divorced on Valentine's Day. We're going to have like an anti-Valentine's Day. Instead of a wrestling wedding, we were going to have a wrestling divorce and make it official. No shit, because everybody else does wrestling weddings. I don't want to do what everybody else does. I want
different than, by God.
There you go. And Carmen at the time was all about it. No, I didn't talk directly to Carmen, but Dennis did. And everybody was excited about it. In fact, I called Gary. I said, before I went down and talked to, no, it wasn't before. It was after I talked to Harvey and I was waiting for Harvey to get back to me because it didn't happen overnight. It was just like 2 or 3 days I had to wait, right? So the wheels are turning in my head. So that's why I'm reaching out to Dennis and, hey, Dennis, I got an idea. Here's why. Cool. Call you back. Got Carmen on board. Guy called Gary. He said, this is what we're going to do. He loved it. He loved it. Have a big ceremony in the whole 9 yards and just have them get divorced.
Well, let's talk about a divorce that was inevitable. When it looks like WCW is going to be packaged up and sold by Turner, you think at first you're going to have the ability to retain your rights to TNT and TBS. And then quickly you realize, wait a minute, no TV deal. So you have at least a handful of days, but that's really all it is, to try to see, is there another opportunity out there? What was your experience like in that sort of lame duck period where you knew that, hey, WCW can be yours, but not with Turner Television?
Oh, we didn't. We were out. The minute that phone call ended, Brian called me, Brian Badal. That was it. We were out. We were done. There was no trying to salvage it. There was no trying to sell it anywhere else. I had meetings during the period of time that we were doing our due diligence, and that was a long period of time. I think I can't remember. Brian Badal could, obviously, because I wasn't involved in it. It's not like my memory's that bad. I just wasn't involved in the due diligence, right? I'm trying to remember, but I'm going to say it was probably 3 months. Wasn't less than that, probably more than that, but we'll call it 3 months. So during that 3-month window where we're doing diligence, we signed the letter of intent, everything's moving in the right direction. And due diligence is really finance people going through the numbers that were being presented and offered, legal going through the contracts, pre-existing contracts, any conflicts that exist. We're certainly looking at talent contracts. It was just a lot of that boring shit that takes time. And so during that time, I was, and again, directed by Brian Badal. I wasn't just out there freelancing. We wanted to know what our options were in case we wanted to create another program, in case we wanted to move a program from Turner to somewhere else. And I had a meeting with a guy by the name of Peter Liguri, was the head of FX at the time, working for Fox. And his number two, which was a guy by the name of Kevin Riley, who went on to become the exec at Turner that greenlit Dynamite 5 years ago. Same guy. So I had a meeting with Peter and Kevin. I think Riley's his last name. Could be wrong. But it was the same guy. I had a meeting with several meetings with them, actually. And there was some strong interest, but no commitment. And actually, at one point in time, this just occurred to me, it put me in an awkward position. At one point in time, either after my first or second meeting with Peter Liguri at Fox, FX, I had a conversation with Brad Siegel. And Brad was really excited about the opportunity because he wanted to leverage the opportunity I was trying to create with FX and Fox. Brad wanted to leverage that to get first crack at reruns of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. I wasn't familiar with the show. I think it was Sabrina. It's either Sabrina the Teenage Witch or something like that. But it was a really hot show, right? And Brad wanted it for first run syndication. First run syndication means you go from network to the first time it gets replayed, right? As you know, first run syndication, second run gets a lot cheaper. Third run, anybody can do it. Fourth run, people forgot they even have it. So Brad wanted a shot at first run syndication for Teenage Sabrina. So it was, he wanted to try to figure out a way to leverage that. That's as far as that got for some reason. I think we were probably waiting till after the deal was done because you couldn't really negotiate a piece of property that you didn't really own. You could have preliminary conversations. You can have what if conversations, which is probably what most of those conversations were with Peter Liguri and Kevin. But yeah, that's what I remember.
We should talk a little bit about your experience in your second act. And we don't talk a lot about that here on the show. I'm talking about your creation of non-wrestling television shows with your production company. But before we do that, this is a nostalgia pod. So here's a quick question for you. Are you a fan of the 80s and 90s? Do you long for the good old days? You still too sweet, every stranger wearing an NWO shirt? Then check out a new nostalgia podcast called Be Kind, Let's Rewind. Join three lifelong friends as they discuss television, movies, music, and pop culture from the 80s, 90s, and beyond. They've covered topics ranging from personalities that we know and love, like the Macho Man Randy Savage or Hulk Hogan, to movies like Predator and Happy Gilmore. They also have live interviews with authors like John Finkel and our buddy, Dr. Brad, who we've spent a lot of time with here on the program. And even the Batman executive producer, Michael Uslan. Be sure to check out John and Brad's books, Macho Man, The Untamed, The Unbelievable Life of Randy Savage, and Brad's book, The Six Pack, On the Open Road in Search of WrestleMania. Join Be Kind, Let's Rewind for weekly segments such as Booze of the Week, Shit Stuck in My Head This Week, and the infamous Pizza Gorilla. And of course, the Norm Macdonald Clip of the Week. New episodes air every Friday on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and all your major podcasting platforms. So be sure to subscribe to their YouTube page at Be Kind, Let's Rewind. And you can engage with the show on Instagram, X, and Discord. If you love 80s and 90s nostalgia, this is the show for you. Check it out. Be Kind, Let's Rewind. By the way, while we're rewinding, what if we rewound to a time when there were better interest rates? It turns out they're coming back, boys and girls. If you haven't already, go get yourself a quick quote at savewithconrad.com. It's no cost, no obligation. And if we can't help you save some money, we won't waste your time. We're routinely helping our podcast listeners take advantage of an opportunity they've got right now where all of a sudden our homes are worth more than ever. And at the same time, if you've ran up some credit card debt, man, if you feel stuck making that minimum payment, you know you can do better than that 28% or whatever it may be. Find out how easy it is to combine all of that into one low monthly payment. We're routinely helping our podcast listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. Oh, and did I mention you can skip your next two house payments? That's right. No payments in September or October. You're done until November 1st. And come November, you're going to have a better mortgage. I want you to really think about this. What does the end of your loan look like? How old are you going to be when you pay it off? Isn't it weird that we don't talk about things like that? We hear people all the time say, oh, I got 2 car payments left. How many house payments you got left, cuz? Let's get a plan that saves you some money this month, but meets your long-term goals as well. And you don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket to do this, because we don't say no, we say not yet, but here's how. We want to be your mortgage advisor for life. You've got a friend in the mortgage business. That's me. Savewithconrad.com. Get yourself a quick quote. You can even email me directly, Conrad@savewithconrad.com. Just heard from a WWE champion this week looking to save a little money. We hooked him up. I'm going to hook you up too. Savewithconrad.com. Eric, let's talk about Bischoff Hervey Entertainment. You know, we've spent, years now talking about your experience in the wrestling business, but very little time talking about outside wrestling television projects. And you find yourself in an ever-changing landscape, and I'm sure working in the confines of Turner on the inside looking out. Now you find yourself on the outside looking in. What was that whole process like when you would negotiate to get your new ideas, your new programs on television? Take us through that negotiation process.
The negotiation was like the last step. You know, the first step obviously is coming up with an idea. And literally one of the things that Jason and I were probably best at for a period of time, probably some of the best at, was just, first of all, knowing what the market was looking for, being aware of what was working for other networks, the type, the genre. You we did unscripted, primarily unscripted. We did, I think, one unscripted series, but primarily unscripted, right? Reality. So you'd look around it and see what was working, what networks were, and you would learn, it's one of the great things about having a really good agent, because your agent, you have a good television agent, he not only represents you, she represents maybe 10 or 15 other people just like us who were creating and developing and pitching shows. Well, during the pitch process, you learn what the customer's looking for. So a good agent is constantly taking notes because they're in 15 or 20 pitch meetings a week. And because they're in those meetings, they're hearing firsthand what the networks are looking for. So that when Jason and I would have our meetings with our agents, it would be almost like a temperature check. Our agent, for a large portion of the time, was a guy by the name of Hans Schiff. And we would Hans was a senior guy, loved working with Hans. We'd sit down with Hans maybe once a week, go out for coffee or a drink after work or whatever, and say, okay, Hans, what's the market looking for? And you get a general idea. And that's our starting point. Okay, the market is looking for this type of program. And that's one of the things, by the way, to this day. I just had a conversation. I'm going to be vague here. And I was like, because I'm dangling a carrot, but I promised to keep it quiet until we had done fleshing it out. But I got a call from a friend of mine who is a former writer in WWE, who is also a very successful television producer outside of wrestling. And he's got an idea, and he wanted to get my opinion on his idea. And his idea is based on another program that is so hot right now. It's on Amazon. I'm not going to give you the name of it, but it's an Amazon property. There's only been one episode so far, but now everybody in Hollywood wants that. We want our version of that. You know how many times I've heard that conversation or that directive sitting down with a network executive? We want our version of that successful show. We want you to steal somebody else's shit. Dress it up a little bit different, put some different people in it, add an element or two that's unique, and then boom, off we go. That's how Hollywood works. It is so risk averse. Executive, especially now, because the margins are shitty. And like I told you, it's one of the reasons why the network executive turnstile is, it's like a cattle chute now more than anything else. And because of that, everybody is so afraid to try anything new that typically what they want you to do in Hollywood is go develop something that's just like that, just like my friend who called me this past week and said, go watch the show and let's come up with something just like that. So nothing changes. But we'd sit down with Hans, and Jason and I spent a lot of time together. Jason moved from LA to Cave Creek, Arizona, where I had a home. He lived half a mile away from me. So even when we weren't in our office, we had an office in LA, and our staff was in LA, but neither one of us lived there. We'd be there for 3, 4, 5 days at a time sometimes, but oftentimes we weren't. And we were at home. We would go out to eat. We'd go out for a beer. We'd go out riding Harleys, stop somewhere, and we would just riff ideas. And it all started with, what if? It's every one of them. It started with, what if? And sometimes those ideas were ridiculous. Sometimes they were pretty good ideas. And if it was a good idea, well, then we start developing it. By developing it, I mean you start figuring out the format. What is the show? Define the show. Where are the beats, elements, plot points? Call them whatever the fuck you want. Where are the markers within that format that we know that we're going to be able to solicit the right types of emotions? Sometimes you want to build anticipation. Sometimes you want to create anger. Sometimes you want to create resentment. Sometimes you want to create jealousy. Sometimes you just want to create joy and laughter. So what are those elements, those emotional elements? How do they play into this format? And most importantly, what's the payoff? Because that's the question that everybody asks when you go in to pitch a show. Great, I get the idea. What's the payoff? What's your finish, basically? So we would develop those ideas on paper. Now, it's a little bit different now than it used to be. And by the way, Conrad, stop me anytime, because I can just go straight through for an hour on this shit. But once you had a basic idea on paper, then we would, more often than not, we'd go through it with our agent and get a second set of eyes and a second opinion, third opinion on it, see if there was any input he would have. And then back in this period of time, we're talking about up until about 2000. I got out of the business in 2017 is when I got out of television. Up till about 2012, you could pitch shit on paper. You could do paper pitches. You could show someone the beats, show them the plot point, show them the format, show them the payoff, talk about the talent, talk about the type of people you're going to bring into the show. You could do all that without spending a dime in terms of production. Now, you've got to go out and shoot a casting tape. You've got to shoot a sizzle reel. And oh, by the way, it's got to be pretty high quality if you want to get a network's attention. The cost of presenting a pitch right now to do it well is probably about 25 grand. That's just to get in the door and get a meeting. Because if you don't have that, nobody's going to take you seriously. It's pretty crazy. Crazy. But we'd develop it, we'd pitch it. Now, sometimes we would pitch an idea, take, oh God, I can never remember the names of shows, but take the show we sold to Discovery, Motorcycle Gang, Club, Devil's Ride, name of the show. That one we had to spend quite a bit of money shooting the cast because the cast was so critical to that. So the cast is always critical, but I think the network wanted to actually make sure we could deliver what we said we were going to deliver, which were, by the way, legitimate club members, not in their colors because that doesn't work for advertising. But a lot of our cast were current, couple former, more current club members in very high profile clubs. And the network, in fact, at the time, it might have been Zaslav, wanted, not that we pitched David personally, I don't think, but whoever the exec was we were pitching wanted to make sure we could actually deliver. And we did. And that cost us some money. But in that case, at least at that time, when the network exec would say, look, I'm really interested in this idea, but I got to see a casting tape. Here's $5,000. Put together a casting tape. So at that point, it wasn't out of our pocket. That was fine. And you get through the casting tape process, and if it moved further down the approval process, then we want to see a sizzle reel. We want to see what 5 minutes of the show looks like. Okay? And we would get a budget for that. Usually in the area of about $25,000. And they wanted it to be about 15 minutes. They wanted to see enough meat on the bone that they could get a feel for the show. Sometimes a network would ask for an airable pilot, meaning we're not sure we want to put this on the air, but we're going to throw more money at it. We want you to produce it as if it were going to be broadcast. And we want to have the option of broadcasting it if we choose. Now, that's obviously a bigger commitment. And you know when you hit that level that you're about 90% of the way home. Because at that point, if somebody's asking you for an airable pilot, $300,000-$400,000, $250,000, down and dirty. Maybe in today's environment, $200,000 for a half hour. But like I said, once you get to that point, you know you're almost home. But every process is different too. There were times when we had a network exec that we just, and to this day, she's a sweetheart of a person. She and her kids have been out and visit Lori and I here in Wyoming. Her name is Melanie Moreau. She was an exec at Viacom. Just the coolest chick. I say that with nothing but respect. She's a fucking hippie, and I dig her. She's got such a great personality and such a great energy, and she's so creative, and her daughters are just like her. She's an amazing person, by the way. But Melanie would sometimes call us up and say, hey, you guys think you could do this? Sometimes you'd have a good enough relationship, strong enough relationship with network and executives that if they had an idea they would call us and throw it our way to see if we could develop it for them. That was always fun. Because for the most part, Jason and I would say 80 or 90% of everything we sold was sold because he and I sat down and had a pizza and a beer together, started talking about what if shit. I miss that. That's the one thing I do miss. I miss the collaboration. I miss that part of wrestling too. But when Jason and I, when we were on a roll, and we were on a long roll, our roll lasted from about 2003 till about 2015. It quit being fun about 2012. But yeah, in fact, it went to 2017. That was the last show that we produced, a show called Dope Man, with a friend of ours, drug addict, former drug addict. Son OD'd from drugs while our friend was in jail. And he got clean, turned his life around. He's now an advocate for drug rehab. He's working with rehab facilities. He's speaking. He's doing speaking again. I retweet him on social media all the time. Anyway, I mean, every idea was different. Every project was different. They all developed in different ways.
Let's talk about a few that maybe some of our listeners are familiar with. You did a Girls Gone Wild thing in association with WWE. How does that come about?
Yeah, that was weird. I knew Joe Francis through Jason Hervey. Jason Hervey and Joe Francis they knew each other. Similar in age. Joe was a Hollywood guy. Jason was a Hollywood guy. They ran into each other. Anyway, they became friends. I think Joe actually worked for Peter Guber over at Mandalay Entertainment. Jason was also an executive at Mandalay Entertainment, and that's how they really became friends. Okay, now fast forward. I get to know Joe. He's cranking out these Girls Gone Wild videos. He's just printing money. I mean, my God, that guy made a freaking fortune. We're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars with his project, Girls Gone Wild, before he started getting stupid and cratering himself. But I got to know Joe, and there was a rumor at the time that Hugh Hefner wanted to sell Playboy. Joe was interested. I heard, I don't know if I was out to lunch with Joe or in his office and went, Joe had the money, and Joe was interested in purchasing Playboy. I had heard that Vince McMahon was interested in Playboy. So I got Joe Francis and Vince McMahon together at a couple different meetings. And then the idea came about is, look, Girls Gone Wild is going to be down in South Padre Island, I think is where we were for that particular spring break. We're going to be doing this big thing. What if we create a pay-per-view and let WWE produce it? And all I did was connect the dots. I didn't really have a hand in the production of the show. That was Kevin Dunn and the entire team. They brought the truck down, satellite trucks, big WWE truck, whole 9 yards, just like, they would to an event. And Kevin Dunn took over the production of it, but I was the one that brokered the deal.
What about the Sturgis Rally in 2004? I know, we're all familiar with Road Wild and Hog Wild, but you did a pay-per-view just on the Sturgis Rally, I think in 2004, 20 years ago. How does that one come to be?
That was just Jason and I. What if, Sturgis was an event? It still is to this day, 300, 400, depending on who you listen to. Attendance figures, they're all bullshit, whether it's wrestling or Sturgis or whatever. But yeah, I think this year I heard there was like 500,000 bikers there from all over the world. Whatever the number is, it's massive. A lot of sponsorship there, a lot of money being spent in Sturgis, tons and tons and tons of money. So Jason and I thought, having been there a few times, we knew that this event was happening 20 miles outside of the Sturgis. This event was happening 40 miles outside of Sturgis. This event is happening downtown. So our idea was to put together crews so that we could cover all of the events that are going on in Sturgis on any given evening. Now, some of it we would have taped earlier in the day or earlier in the evening. Some of it we didn't do any live shots except for where we were hosting from. So all of it would have been pre-taped segments from either the night before or during the day. And then we had a live band. Jackal was the band. Very, very popular band. Kind of a Southern AC/DC type of band. And they were our featured live performance. And we would music, fun, crowd, chicks flashing, everybody's having fun. Now let's go downtown and see what's happening at the bike burnout rally. And then we'd have a correspondent there reporting from that part of Sturgis. And we just put it all together so that people at home who had never been to Sturgis, we wanted to give them the most comprehensive look at everything that was going on in Sturgis. So that was the idea. That's where it started.
Guys, do you know how excited I am? We've got a college game day this weekend. That means Alabama football is back. You've heard me talk about it on the program forever and ever. Roll Tide. I get asked all the time, hey, what does that mean? Dude, come on. I was born and raised here in Alabama, and college football has been a religion. I don't know if you saw, but we even just named the field in Tuscaloosa after Nick Saban. And I don't think we should stop there. That dude could be the damn governor of Alabama. I'm such a big Nick Saban fan. I can't believe this is a real thing, but he's actually going to be the guest on the premiere episode of the Triple Option. Yeah. We're living in a new age of football, and with the expanded college football playoff, NIL, conference realignment, and the increasing popularity of the draft, the landscape is changing and quickly. And that's where the new podcast, The Triple Option, comes in. Each week, 3-time national championship coach Urban Meyer, Heisman Trophy winner Mark Ingram II, Roll Tide, and former WWE champion Rob Stone. Is this real? Team up to bring on the biggest guests in college football, pro football, and anything related to the culture of the game. They cover it all, from the top stories to recent changes and shifts in the game, the culture surrounding it, and everything in between. Urban Meyer brings his championship pedigree perspective as a head coach. Ingram brings one of the game's best players ever. And well, Rob provides thoughts from over 2 decades covering the game. I'm a big fan of these type of podcasts where you get a chance to take a look back and talk about current stuff. If you like the format that we do on some of my shows, where we're talking about the nostalgia and we're talking about the current stuff, I think you're going to love this. Especially being a college football guy. I mean, who's more decorated than Urban Meyer? I mean, you want to talk about a brilliant football mind. Whether you were a fan of his or not, you have to appreciate his knowledge. Same with Mark Ingram. You have no idea as an Alabama fan what a big deal it was when he won the Heisman Trophy. I can't wait to listen to this, but I do want to know, how the hell did Rob Stone get this gig and not me? Hey, let's go ahead and get in the game today. Follow and subscribe to the Triple Option on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Watch the Triple Option on YouTube. New episodes drop Wednesday mornings. That's the Triple Option on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget the Triple Option on YouTube. New episodes drop Wednesday mornings. Let's talk a little bit about some of your other series, and maybe you've got some little nuggets you can drop us. You did a bunch with VH1. Scott Baio is 45 and single. Scott Baio is 46 and pregnant. I Want to Be a Hilton. Confessions of a Teen Idol. You had a lot of success with VH1. How was VH1 to deal with? What was it like working with VH1?
It was always fun. You know, the execs that we worked with, and Jason really, he dealt with the execs more on a day-to-day basis than I did. I was involved in pitches. I would be there. But Jason is a social animal, and I'm not. Anybody that knows me knows that. It's not that I don't like people. It's just that I like not being around them more. So I keep, very close friends, of which you're obviously one, my family, and, a few other friends. But I'm not an outgoing person. And that's why Jason and I work together so well. Jason was very outgoing, and he just developed these great relationships with these guys. But everybody that, there was never anybody that we worked with that either one of us was like, oh, hopefully we never have to work with this person again. they were always pretty cool. Once you got to the point where you're actually producing a show, again, it became very collaborative. And for those execs, it was kind of more fun. They got to be out of the office, actually being a part of a show instead of looking at spreadsheets and listening to people bitch about how much money they're not making in their division. So, yeah, it was always fun.
What about working with CMT? You had a couple of projects over there.
I love CMT. We did well. Melanie Moreau, she was the exec at CMT. We did some projects for her. We did Hulk Hogan's Championship Wrestling there. We did a show with
Billy Ray Cyrus.
We did with Billy Ray. That was fun. He was kind of a cool guy. Not as much of a cornball as you would think. We did a show with Ted Nugent. That was awesome. I got to hang out at Ted's ranch in Waco, Texas, and shoot machine guns with him, fully automatic machine guns. Ted and I and Jason down, and Garrett. I brought Garrett with me on that shoot. We went to Ted Nugent's ranch. We shot 8 episodes there. It's kind of a survival show. And not Melanie Moreau, but the senior, I can't remember his name, the senior guy at Viacom above CMT, actually, found out that we were doing a show with Ted Nugent because of Ted's politics. They spent, I don't know, $3 million on this show. They paid us. We probably took down 25% of that, 20% of it at least, 10% of the executive producer fees, and then we'd mark up our production fees by 10%. So we'd get 10% of the total budget, in this case, $300,000 plus another $300,000 for executive producer fees. They paid us. And then because of politics, they just put the show up on the shelf. Never to be seen or heard from again. It's crazy.
Let's talk about, because you had a cup of coffee with TNA and you know a little bit, not a ton, but you probably know a little bit about the TNA relationship with Spike. How would you compare and contrast, say, the TNA relationship with Spike, the WCW and Turner relationship, and then the WWE relationship with Viacom, if you will? How are those different? I mean, obviously we know the big one is, well, Turner owned WCW, so they're not negotiating with sort of an outside third party. We know at different times TNA would sort of subsidize, maybe is a better word, some TNA stuff. But what about the WWE Viacom relationship? Is it sort of in the middle? I mean, if there's a good, better, best model, just take us through the differences, if you will.
Well, I didn't see the WWE Viacom relationship firsthand. I was there as a talent, and as a talent, you're not exposed to. It's one of my biggest bitches about, former WCW talent back in the 90s who were, all project what they think went wrong, and none of them have a fucking clue what they're talking about. Most wrestling talent knows less about the business of the wrestling business than people that watch it on television. It's just the nature of the beast. I never, again, didn't see it firsthand. The one time I got a glimpse, I was still talent. This was before I got into management. And for some reason, I was on the jet with Vince and a couple others and the exec from TNN at that time. And I'd be damned if I can remember his name. Just a short little guy, kind of pudgy, very, very quiet, unassuming. You would have never, ever picked him out, of a lineup as a television or entertainment executive. He looked the opposite of that. Nonetheless, he was there, and I could just feel, and I was a talent. I just barely knew Vince McMahon, right? But I could just tell that there was like icing taking place inside the cabin of that jet. Vince wouldn't even make eye contact with this, and I felt bad for him. I didn't know him well enough. It wasn't my place to sit down and have a chat with the network exec on Vince's jet. So I stayed in my lane, so to speak, and minded my own business. But I was looking and go, man, this guy feels like, I don't know why he's on this plane, but man, nobody wants him here, and I could tell. That's the only sense, and that doesn't mean I was right. I could have just been reading the room wrong, but that was my impression. I did get a lot closer to Viacom and TNA. I developed a pretty good relationship with Kevin Kay. Nothing special, but a good, solid working relationship. Scott Fishman, who is not the wrestling reporter, Fishman, but Scott Fishman, the television producer, and I got along really well. And Jeff got along with Scott Fishman really well. Scott Fishman was the kind of guy that could really get along with just about anybody, but he was talented. He gave you a lot of rope as a network executive, and he deferred to people in TNA who knew more about wrestling than he did, but he would stand his ground when it came to television format and how to execute it. That's another thing that, going back to Tony Khan, I know you want to wrap this up here pretty quick. I'm going to try to make it fast.
No, I'm not.
But I just read it wrong then. Okay. That's another thing that I think Tony Khan, take that back. That's another thing that if AEW and Turner, WBD do move forward, for the life of me, I cannot figure out why David Zaslav takes some responsibility for the $45 million a year he's spending now, or hopefully more, if indeed there is a renewal, and assign a network executive to that show that demands consistency in storytelling, that understands what a story is. Forget about the fact that you don't know anything about wrestling, because that's a bullshit wrestling angle, by the way, that a lot of producers of wrestling like to pull. I've watched it a million times. Is, well, yeah, you may know a lot about telling, but the wrestling business is so much different. You got to stay away from this. Vince McMahon did it successfully. There's no other form of programming out there that a television network is going to spend the kind of money that they spend on wrestling and go, guys, just come up with some good shit. We're happy to have you. When Jason and I were producing shows, if we actually went into production, probably 1 out of 7 times we would pitch a show, we'd sell it. Sometimes better than that. When we went into production, there were like network executives coming at you like bees out of a hive. Everybody wanted to have a voice. Everybody wanted their opinion expressed. Everybody in the food chain wants to make notes, because as you're developing a show, okay, we're going to come up with this format. Let's send it around to the team at the network and get their input, because everybody wants to be involved. It's their jobs. In a way, it's their job security. The more they're involved and the more they contribute to projects, the more valuable they are in the eyes of their employers, right? Well, for independent producers like Jason and I, that means you got a bunch of people that don't know fuck all about what they're doing, but just really want to be involved. And for whatever reason, wrestling has been able to avoid that process for the most part. For the moment that I was in WWE, I was there for the Fox premiere. I was there leading up to the Fox premiere. Part of my job as executive director of SmackDown, at least on paper, was to have daily conversations, or at least regular conversations, with my counterparts at Fox to make sure that got the format, know what's coming up, we have time to react to any of their concerns. They would make notes on the format. That's what I would do if I was David Zaslav and I was going to spend money here. I would actually be a real network executive and assign somebody who really understands storytelling and isn't going to listen to any wrestling bullshit to oversee the process. It's their real estate. It's their money. And to not have a voice in the process, when that's what a lot of network is, that's what they're there for. They are there to oversee the production of the shows that air on their network. And they have to have basic understanding of format and storytelling and character development and all the other things that go into making a good show. That's why you end up in that position as a network executive. I would assign somebody to oversee AEW that does understand those elements and is not going to be intimidated by the fact that they don't know anything about wrestling, because that's a fucking mirage. This is just storytelling, character-driven entertainment, folks. It's not rocket science. It's really not. It's hard. It's not easy. I'm not suggesting that anybody can do it, just like not everybody can play a flute. But it's also not brain surgery.
We got a couple of questions on Twitter that really piqued your interest. Here's one from Big Meat. He says, Eric, with your vast knowledge in the television business, what rating system do you find to be most accurate? Today's version of total viewers or in the Nitro era of total households?
It's all voodoo. I mean, look, Nielsen's the only thing we've got. There's nothing else. And until there is, that's what Madison Avenue, that street in New York, where probably 75% of the revenue that's generated in advertising and television today, it all takes place in New York on Madison Avenue. And until there's another formula in place that is job secure for the executives that are in the television business, because they don't want some new thing coming out that's going to make their new rating system come out that's going to make their jobs harder. So as long as everybody's subscribing to Nielsen as the measurement, they're going to accept it. I think it's all voodoo. I think it's best guess scenarios. I think there's so many variables given the sample size at Nielsen, which is relatively small. The methodology, the technology that's being used is fucking rotary phone level at this point, based on what it could be. But there's nothing else. And I don't think there's any difference between total viewers. Probably total viewers is easier for people to understand. Because when you look at a rating, you'd have to know the formula to figure out how many people are actually watching a 2.1 and a 5 share. Well, what the fuck does that mean? Right? You'd have to do the math to figure it out. So total viewers is a little easier at first glance, but I don't think it makes any difference.
Another question you really liked on Twitter. This is from DC. He says, I know the focus for AEW analysis is on North American attendance / viewership, but is there an argument that Warner Brothers Discovery sees value in AEW as something they can put on their streaming service and have an international audience that likes wrestling?
That's a really great question. Thank you, Wayne, for that. I love intelligent questions, and this one, it's a good one. Could be, but if we step back and look at, other than Netflix and Amazon, everybody else in streaming is losing their ass. That doesn't mean there isn't a long-term strategy in play or being considered or developed that would make AEW strategically more valuable than its current value when it comes to advertising. So in other words, they could be losing their ass and not selling enough advertising to really justify the show. But if there is a long-term strategy that makes AEW and their 600,000 or 700,000 loyal viewers shift over to a streaming platform at some point, that could have value that none of us understand, because we're not in that business, because we're not a part of those conversations. So it could be, Wayne, I think it's a stretch at this point, mostly because streaming is just not profitable. But we'll see. Again, I hate to keep always saying, well, we'll see. Of course we'll see, because we can't predict anything with any accuracy when it comes to television.
Well, something we can predict is that we are going to be live here immediately following All In this Sunday at 83weeks.com. If you haven't already, go hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications bell, and make plans to join us this Sunday, immediately following All In from London. And by the way, next week here on the program, as a matter of fact, we're going to do it at 83weeks.com. Another reason to hit that subscribe button. We're going to talk about launching the WCW Hall of Fame. That's right. We talked about it earlier this year, and we talked about 10 people who we thought were shoe-ins. But over the next handful of days at 83weeks.com, you'll see different categories put up, and it's up to you to include your choices. We'll take your choices and discuss them next week, and then we'll present the top 4 choices for the following categories for your votes. And then we're going to induct them into the 83 Weeks Hall of Fame for the 29th anniversary of the Monday Nitro debut. The categories are tag teams. We want to know, who do you think are the most influential and important Hall of Fame worthy tag teams in WCW history? What about a behind the scenes player? somebody who maybe didn't get their flowers in front of the camera, but boy, they were a big cog in the wheel known as World Championship Wrestling. A generational influencer. Immediately, I think there's a masked man who we all think of, but maybe there are others. What about a group or a faction? Whether it was the Horsemen or the NWO, or there's probably a handful of others, but it's a short list when you're talking about greatness like that in WCW. And then a single star. So if we're going to craft like year one, a class, a Hall of Fame class, if you will, for a WCW Hall of Fame, what would that look like? We want your input. You can vote on that over the next 5 days at 83weeks.com. We want to hear your suggestions. Let's hear those nominees. And then we'll go ahead and discuss it next week. And then you guys will vote. And ta-da! As we celebrate the 29th anniversary of Nitro. What a crazy sentence that is. We'll talk about the very first class for the WCW Hall of Fame here on 83 Weeks. Eric, I had a blast talking about the television business, and I have a feeling, I don't have any inside information, but I have a feeling, and if I knew I had a deal, this would be the week to announce it. So hopefully, knock on wood, we hear that AEW got a new great television deal. That's great for the wrestling business, whether you're a fan of AEW or not. If they get an increase, and it's a sizable increase, having another profitable wrestling company is a good thing. I think we're all pulling for that. Any final notes from you this week, Mr. Bischoff, before we put a button on this one and get ready for Sunday?
No, man, but I do like doing this kind of show every once in a while, the Ask Eric formats, because as much as I love talking about nostalgia and going back and watching shows from the 90s or whatever, it is fun to talk about the business of the wrestling business. And certainly discussing television is a great way to do that. So thank you. And thank you to everybody, Derek Sabato, Dave Silva, for putting this all together. And I dig it.
Stay tuned, boys and girls. We'll be back this Sunday at 83weeks.com, immediately following AEW All In. Come join Eric and I. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly from Wembley Stadium. And next week, we're going to start talking a little bit about a WCW Hall of Fame. What if? Two of my favorite words in the English language. We'll see you there, right here, actually, at 83weeks.com. SaveWithConrad.com.
Mark Taggart from Rantoul, Illinois. My wife started the process with one of the big major corporations, and things were going very badly. And finally, I just stopped and said, hey, listen, I've been listening to the ads for years. Let's go with Save with Conrad and see what we can have happen. We were trying to free up a little space so we could spend down some debt and do some home improvements. We saved quite a bit, and in the long run, we're going to do a lot better with Save with Conrad than we would have anywhere else. It was absolutely beautiful. You know, like Larry and Francis they were the greatest. Not only were they professional, knew what they were talking about, they were friendly, and they cared about the job they were doing, which was so important to me. I would absolutely recommend Save with Conrad to anybody. Hi, this is Mark Taggart from Rantoul, Illinois, and I wanted to do some home improvements and spend down a little debt, and I got hold of Save with Conrad, and we did incredibly.
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender.
SaveWithConrad.com.